And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Scott Swan in the Channel 13 studios. We've got breaking news coming out of Carroll County this afternoon. We have learned there is a verdict in the Delphi murders case, and we've got a crew on the scene just outside the Delphi courthouse. Anne Marie Tiernan joins me live to tell us what you know at this hour. Anne?
Scott, Bob just stepped outside of the court. Verdict was read. We're told it took less than 2 minutes. Bob, explain the scene, everything you've learned.
So, and it was, 2 minutes. Guilty, 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 and guilty. All 4 counts against Richard Allen. Jurors came back. Obviously, it must be unanimous. The judge asked the defense team if they wanted to pull the jurors. The defense team did, so we got to hear every one of the jurors say that indeed was their verdict. Again, guilty on felony murder of Abby Williams, guilty felony murder of Libby German, guilty murder of knowingly or intentionally killing Abby, and guilty murder knowingly or intentionally killing Libby. Richard Allen sat emotionless. He did not show any emotion during the verdict as it was read. The defense counsel, specifically Andrew Baldwin, was sitting right next to him. He had his arm around Richard Allen at that time. He was rubbing the back of his head. The judge made it very clear that she wanted everyone to remain respectful, no outbursts in the courtroom, and there were not. But the families of Abby and Libby certainly were overcome with emotion. Becky Patty, that's Libby's grandmother, she was clutching her husband Mike's arm. And when the verdict came in, right in the front row, Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, he put his hands, he put his head down into his hands. He began crying. Again, it took less than 2 minutes for the main part of all of this to play out. And at the end of it, the judge thanked the jurors for their service. She thanked the attorneys for what she said was a well-argued case on both sides. Richard Allen was led away in handcuffs. And at that point, after he left the room, after the judge left the room, after the jurors left the room, that's when we really saw the emotion. That's when we saw, again, Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter. He reached back and he held on tightly to Libby's grandmother's hand.
I know it's tough. You've been watching these families. It's emotional for everybody involved. The families sharing to you that when they saw some of the testimony and some of the evidence in the case and hearing the voice of a loved one that they haven't heard for 7.5 years. I mean, this has been very, very difficult. We did see outside when the news broke, Emily, quite an outburst here along the streets.
Yeah, there was a lot of cheering, guilty, guilty. You saw some people crying and rushing away. Saw a gentleman that I've seen sitting with the Allen family throughout the trial. He walked out very swiftly and very quietly, and I kind of perked up to see him, and I thought, what's that about? And then the next thing you know, here was the pool reporter coming out with all of the charges. But yeah, loud out here, people cheering.
There was a lot for this jury to consider, Bob. We were adding it up. We kind of got 19 or 20 hours of deliberations is what we think is probably a pretty close estimate to going through all that evidence, all the witness testimony, which frankly was very contradictory. And they were able to sort through that. But this resounding, we had talked about the possibility perhaps of there being a split in this verdict. Maybe the knowing and intentional would maybe not be something given the evidence that the jury thought that they would be able to say beyond a reasonable doubt, but that all proved not to be the case.
Not the case. And the jury did, I believe that obviously the confessions moved the jury. That was the most powerful evidence we saw, I think, throughout this entire verdict, and I think that was something that moved jurors in this situation, and it appears that they also believed the physical evidence that the state presented tying Richard Allen to the scene.
That cartridge, right?
Yeah.
That cartridge. I'm curious to know what the the faces of the juries? Were they stoic? Were they? Did they look at anyone?
To be honest, Emily, I was looking directly at Richard Allen, and I was trying to look at the families. We should mention a sentencing date has been set, so December 20th is when Richard Allen will be sentenced, and during the sentencing portion of the verdicts being read today, this was after the verdicts were read, but at that point, Richard Allen turned around. It was the first emotion that we saw. He looked at his wife, Kathy, and he said, "Are you okay?" Kathy was crying. Richard Allen's mother was in court. She was crying. Again, as things started to clear out, Jerry Holman, Indiana State Police detective, who has been on this case for multiple years, he went over and he hugged the defense team and he kissed Nick McLeland, the prosecutor. There were a lot of hugs on the side of the prosecution. Again, after the families were starting to leave, we were asked to stay in the courtroom to give the families a chance to file out. The families went up to the prosecution team, shook hands, hugged as well. So a lot of emotion. Again, everyone kind of kept things in check while the jury was in there, while the judge was in there afterward. That's when we saw the emotion really starting to let out.